Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're plunging into a topic that's both crucial and, well, frankly, pretty challenging to confront. We're talking about the effectiveness, or maybe more accurately, the surprising ineffectiveness of traditional combat patrols in modern conflicts. It's really an area where strategy, technology, culture, and most profoundly human lives all intersect. Okay, let's unpack this. Our mission for this deep dive is to really examine a critical analysis of these military tactics. We want to look specifically at why combat patrols often fall significantly short of their intended goals, and perhaps even more importantly, what genuinely viable, more effective alternatives might actually exist. We've gathered some truly incisive material here, stuff that doesn't just challenge conventional wisdom, it brings some surprising and sometimes unsettling facts to light. It really forces us to fundamentally rethink how conflicts are managed and, how peace might even be achieved.
Yeah. And what's truly fascinating here, I think, is that this isn't just some abstract academic exercise, right? This analysis cuts right to the core of how military operations impact actual lives, stability, and the very fabric of societies, really, on a global scale. It's much more than just a discussion about tactics. It's a profound questioning of whether our current approaches are genuinely serving their stated purpose, or if maybe inadvertently they're contributing to the ongoing cycles of conflict, suffering, and instability that we see in so many parts of the world. So our journey today will be pretty comprehensive. We'll first dissect the fundamental flaws, the ones inherent in these traditional methods. Then we'll delve into some powerful real-world examples where these flaws play out with truly tragic consequences. We'll examine the systemic failures that often seem to go hand in hand with them. We'll also explore the often overlooked and indeed underutilized role of technology and highlight the paramount importance of cultural understanding, which is huge. Ultimately, through all this detailed exploration, we aim to uncover pathways towards more effective, more sustainable solutions for achieving genuine security and hopefully lasting peace.
Okay, let's dive right in then. Section 1. The problem why traditional combat patrols fall short. Let's start by cutting straight to the heart of it, beginning with what our source vividly describes as the illusion of activity versus grim reality.
hmm
The central argument here is incredibly stark and I think quite confronting. Combat patrols, which are so often presented as proactive, essential military tactics, are in fact fundamentally flawed. That's the claim. The source argues they consistently lead to unnecessary casualties without achieving any meaningful, lasting strategic outcomes. Wow. Our source really doesn't pull any punches, does it? It describes these operations as widow and orphan makers, essentially sacrificing precious human lives for what it unequivocally deems negligible gains. That's a truly powerful and deeply unsettling image, isn't it? It immediately suggests this profound, maybe even tragic disconnect between the perceived utility, the necessity maybe of these patrols at a strategic level, and their actual, often devastating impact on the ground, on the lives of soldiers and the communities they operate within.
Indeed it does. That phrase, widow and orphan makers, it just cuts right through the usual military jargon, doesn't it? It forces us to confront the human cost head on. And this raises an incredibly important, almost existential question for military strategists. Why? Why do these tactics, with such questionable efficacy and such a high human toll, why do they persist? Our source offers a compelling, though perhaps a bit cynical, explanation. They create an illusion of activity for superiors. Now, this is a critical insight, I think, because it speaks to these deeply ingrained organizational, maybe bureaucratic pressures. Think about it in a broader context. In any large bureaucracy, military ones included, there's often this inherent drive to demonstrate visible action, right? To justify budgets, to fill out reports with quantitative metrics, numbers of patrols conducted, areas cleared, miles covered, engagements initiated, all that stuff. This can inadvertently lead to prioritizing the appearance of action over genuine strategic impact, which is, let's face it, far harder to quantify. This kind of systemic thinking can blind an organization to the true, often devastating human cost. Because on paper, the numbers might look good. It creates a sort of perverse incentive where the act of patrolling becomes an end in itself, rather than a means to a well-defined strategic objective. Commanders might feel compelled, pressured, to order missions that satisfy these reporting requirements, even if their strategic value is minimal, putting soldiers in grave danger for little discernible gain, purely to demonstrate progress up the chain of command. This disconnect, where success is measured by activity rather than actual tangible progress towards stability or security, it's devastating on multiple levels.
Yeah, that distinction between activity and actual progress is really key, isn't it? It truly forces you, the listener, to consider the profound human cost behind all that military jargon. It's incredibly easy to get lost in these sterile terms like combat patrols or counterinsurgency efforts when you're discussing strategy in a conference room somewhere. But when our source frames these operations as widow and orphan makers, it brings the direct, unvarnished impact on families, on children, on entire communities into sharp, painful focus. This is an aspect that, as you say, is so often overlooked in those high-level strategic discussions, completely divorced from the grim day-to-day reality for those living through these conflicts. It really highlights how abstract strategic goals can translate into very concrete, very personal tragedies. So if this illusion of activity is driving these often flawed patrols, how does that actually play out on the ground, when soldiers are facing an enemy that's almost impossible to identify? This brings us to another fundamental problem our source highlights. One, it starkly labels as the dilemma of the ghost enemy and the predicament of the bait soldier. This really gets to the core difficulty and maybe even the cruelty of modern asymmetric warfare. Our source explains that in these environments, insurgents don't wear uniforms. They don't operate in easily identifiable military formations. That's obvious, right? Instead, they blend seamlessly, deliberately into civilian populations. They conceal weapons, explosives, or other dangerous items in the most mundane, everyday objects: grocery bags, maybe a kid's school backpack, luggage, even under the seats of a seemingly ordinary taxi. The kind of things, frankly, you or I might carry without a second thought in our daily lives. This makes identifying them for soldiers on patrol an almost impossible task. It must be. There's no clear uniform, no obvious flag, no distinct operational signature. Every civilian could potentially be a threat, and every threat could just be an ordinary civilian.
That's a crucial distinction, absolutely.
Yes.
And it fundamentally alters the entire battlefield. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it highlights a profound, almost insurmountable asymmetry in modern asymmetric warfare. It's the classic problem. Traditional military training and doctrine, well, they're often built around identifying, targeting, engaging a conventional uniformed enemy on a clearly defined battlefield. But when the enemy defies conventional identification, when they are, by design, indistinguishable from the local populace, the traditional military approach struggles immensely, sometimes to the point of complete ineffectiveness. Without clear, verifiable targets, soldiers on patrol inevitably become, as the source so powerfully puts it, bait.
Bait, yeah.
They are exposed, vulnerable targets, moving slowly through unfamiliar or hostile terrain, constantly susceptible to ambushes, IEDs, sniper attacks, by adversaries who, crucially, possess this intimate, granular familiarity with the terrain, the local customs, the daily rhythms of life, and critically, the likely routes of any patrol. This dynamic creates a constant, pervasive state of vulnerability, and immense psychological stress for the soldiers. It has to. Every shadow, every movement, every face becomes a potential threat you can imagine. This relentless uncertainty and danger can severely erode morale over time. It leads to hypervigilance, which is exhausting, and ultimately it diminishes their overall effectiveness and, importantly, their ability to build rapport with local populations, which is often key. It's a lose-lose situation for the patrolling forces, really, forced into this reactive, defensive posture against an elusive, often invisible adversary.
Exactly. Just try to imagine for a moment operating under those conditions. The impossible task of distinguishing friend from foe when everyone looks the same. When a seemingly innocent civilian carrying groceries could in fact be carrying a hidden threat or maybe signaling your position to someone else. That's a truly harrowing reality for those on the ground. It adds almost unbearable, constant layer of tension, suspicion, and danger to every single step they take, every interaction they have. It's a psychological burden that, honestly, most of us can barely comprehend. And it makes the idea of proactive patrolling feel almost cruelly ironic in that context. A truly harrowing reality. Okay, let's move to Section 2. Systemic failures in practice, a case study, and broader trends. What's particularly frustrating, given this impossible situation on the ground, is when we see how crucial intelligence that could mitigate these dangers often gets completely ignored. Let's delve into a striking case study from our source that powerfully illustrates these systemic failures. The source describes a specific situation where a drone provided precise, actionable intelligence. Get this. It tracked a group of vehicles actively loading weapons at a border crossing. Real-time, confirmed intelligence of an imminent threat, not guesswork. Yet incredibly, commanders failed to intercept those vehicles. They just dispersed in multiple directions, melted away into the landscape. And what's even more astounding is that instead of leveraging that precise technological advantage, instead of using other advanced tools to maybe continue tracking or intercepting them, What did the command structure do? They deployed an entire battalion for dismounted patrols and door-to-door searches across a vast, undifferentiated area. This was a classic, old-school, boots-on-the-ground, blunt force approach, completely disregarding the pinpoint intelligence they had just received.
What's truly fascinating here, and, well, deeply concerning, is the stark, almost surreal contrast between the available, precise, highly advanced technology, that drone footage, and the chosen tactic, which was outdated and, frankly, far less effective.
Right.
It's a profound disconnect. The tragic outcome, as detailed in the source, underscores this point with grim clarity. The insurgents, intimately familiar with the terrain, the local population, and probably anticipating such a predictable, generalized response, were easily able to set traps and launch ambushes. This resulted in significant casualties for the deployed battalion. Lives needlessly lost because of a failure to act on intelligence, and to compound the tragedy. No weapons were seized, no lasting impact was made on the insurgency whatsoever. Yet even more disturbingly, despite the loss of life and the complete lack of concrete results, the operation was, get this, falsely labeled a success in internal reports. This internal reporting distortion isn't just an error. It's absolutely critical because it perpetuates ineffective strategies. It prevents any genuine organizational learning. If failures are continually reported as successes, the system never learns, never adapts, never questions its core assumptions. It can't. It simply prompts the deployment of even more units into similar, equally dangerous, and ultimately ineffective situations, creating this vicious, self-sustaining cycle of wasted resources, wasted lives, and ultimately strategic futility. The metrics of success become completely detached from the reality on the ground, rewarding activity over genuine accomplishment.
So it's not just a tactical error then, is it? It's far more profound than that. It's a story of intelligence being painstakingly gathered at great effort and expense, only to be completely wasted, tossed aside. It's a narrative of lives needlessly lost because the system, at a critical juncture, failed to act on accurate, timely information, choosing instead a familiar but demonstrably ineffective path, the path of least resistance, maybe. This points to a deep-seated, almost institutional problem within the decision-making chain, suggesting a preference for what is comfortable, what can be easily reported as activity, even if it's demonstrably ineffective, over smart, data-driven, and genuinely impactful action. This case study alone speaks volumes about the challenges faced by forces on the ground when strategic decisions are fundamentally misaligned with intelligence capabilities. Okay, building on that, let's turn our attention to another ubiquitous and, according to our source, equally flawed tactic: checkpoints. Our source explicitly states that these are equally ineffective, flat out. And why is that? Because in many conflict zones, national and regional borders often remain incredibly porous, allowing weapons, illicit goods, insurgents to flow freely around these fixed points. Insurgents simply adapt, right? They either bypass the checkpoints entirely through unguarded routes, or even more dangerously, they attack street-level checkpoints directly with suicide vehicles or coordinated assaults, turning them into predictable targets. Vulnerable points. What's truly frustrating and frankly baffling here is the stark contrast with widely available technology. The source points out advanced security measures like millimeter wave scanners and walk-through metal detectors. These aren't experimental gadgets. They're the kind of standard, highly effective security protocols we commonly see in airports, government buildings, secure facilities, maybe even large public events in many countries. These devices can peer through clothing, detect not just metals, but also plastics, powders, liquids, other non-metallic threats that a simple pat-down or old-school metal detector would easily miss. Such tools could, quite dramatically, secure borders, choke off smuggling routes, identify threats with far greater precision. Yet, incredibly, they are rarely, if ever, systematically employed in these occupied territories where they are desperately needed.
This raises an absolutely critical question, one that the source explicitly poses and forces us to confront. Why do nations with advanced security protocols at home fail to apply them abroad, in zones where security is literally a matter of life and death?
Yeah. Why?
The answer, as the source suggests, often points to a combination of factors. Quote, a lack of strategic foresight and an over-reliance on outdated tactics. This technological disconnect is truly puzzling from an outside perspective. Is it primarily a matter of cost, given the scale of deployment that might be needed? Perhaps, but
the human cost seems higher.
Exactly. The cost in human lives and prolonged conflict often far outweighs the investment in technology. Is it due to the significant training requirements for new equipment? The logistical challenges of deploying and maintaining such complex tech in austere, hostile environments. Those are certainly factors. But it could also be, and perhaps more fundamentally, a deep-seated cultural resistance to new methods within military institutions, a preference, an almost ingrained comfort for traditional boots-on-the-ground solutions over sophisticated, often less visible technological ones that fundamentally change how operations are conducted. Regardless of the precise blend of reasons, the result is consistently the same: continued ineffectiveness, unnecessary risks to personnel and civilians, and a failure to secure the very areas they are ostensibly tasked to control, all when vastly superior tools are readily within reach. It's a systemic failure to adapt. It just seems to be.
It's almost counterintuitive, isn't it? We live in an age of incredible technological advancement, yet the tools that could make these operations significantly safer and far more effective tools that could genuinely prevent the flow of weapons and identify individuals who intend harm remain, metaphorically speaking, on the shelf, collecting dust. It begs the question of not just why this happens, but who benefits from this inaction, or conversely, who suffers from this institutional inertia. So, what does this all mean for the bigger picture of military engagement, particularly when we start considering the human element behind all this strategy and technology? Okay, section 3. The human element: culture, knowledge, and blind spots. Your point about the human element brings us seamlessly to another critical aspect, one that, frustratingly, often gets entirely overlooked in high-level discussions of military strategy: the peril of cultural ignorance. Our source explains in vivid detail how a profound ignorance of local culture and dynamics compounds these operational failures, making already difficult situations exponentially worse. Imagine this scenario, as recounted in the source. Commanders ignored a mass gathering in a village. They mistakenly assumed it was just a routine, maybe social event. Seems innocuous enough on the surface, right? A simple misinterpretation. But the source reveals a critical local insight that was entirely missed. In this particular region, local leaders hold such large gatherings only for very specific, deeply significant reasons, perhaps, for major harvests, important religious ceremonies, or to address a profound community crisis. Any other unscheduled or unexplained assembly, according to deeply ingrained local customs, signals something amiss: a significant development, possibly a threat, or an important community decision being made. This vital piece of local intelligence, a clear alarm bell to anyone who understood the culture, was completely overlooked by the foreign commanders.
What's absolutely fascinating and, again, deeply concerning here is how a seemingly small, culturally specific detail can, in fact, be the key to unlocking critical intelligence.
Yeah.
A detail that was entirely missed by those in command because they lacked that foundational understanding. This is incredible.
Yeah.
The source highlights that had these commanders simply employed locals who understood the culture or spoken the language, they could have not only understood the significance of that gathering, but potentially even intercepted those weapons-laden vehicles we discussed earlier, perhaps preventing an entire cascade of casualties. This isn't just about overcoming language barriers, though that's part of it. It's about a deep, intuitive, and empathetic understanding of the societal fabric. The norms, the subtle cues, the hierarchies, the deeply held beliefs that mean everything to the local population but are entirely invisible, entirely opaque to outsiders. Cultural immersion and developing robust, trusted local intelligence networks are absolutely paramount. This isn't just a nice-to-have for PR purposes, it's essential, not only for effectively identifying and neutralizing threats early, but also, crucially, for building trust, legitimacy, and long-term cooperation with the local population. Without that trust, any military operation is inherently operating blind and will inevitably face resistance or, at best, passive non-cooperation. It's just doomed.
That's a powerful reminder. Military success isn't solely about advanced firepower or state-of-the-art drones. Not at all. It's deeply, profoundly intertwined with understanding the human landscape, the unwritten rules, the social complexities, the deeply held cultural beliefs of the very people you're operating among. Ignoring that vital cultural context can be as strategically detrimental and as costly in human lives as ignoring a crucial enemy troop movement on a map. It's a fundamental oversight that can unravel even the best laid plans. And continuing with that same example, the source further illustrates how this cultural ignorance leads directly to missed opportunities and perhaps even more insidiously, unintended consequences. Sending troops into that village, or any village, without a nuanced understanding of its tribal hierarchy, its internal politics, its customs, it proved disastrous. By explicitly asking local leaders to identify insurgents, the commander, likely with good intentions, sure, but he inadvertently sowed discord within the community. He immediately risked intertribal conflict, forcing those leaders into an impossible no-win situation. Imagine the pressure that put those local leaders under, potentially forcing them to betray neighbors, expose their own families to retaliation, or choose sides in a way that would shatter community cohesion for generations.
Right. If we connect this to the bigger picture, this illustrates precisely how even seemingly well-intentioned actions, when executed without proper cultural context and sensitivity, can backfire dramatically, creating new problems rather than solving existing ones. Instead of achieving stability or gaining intelligence, they can alienate the population, create new enemies, exacerbate existing tensions, and unravel whatever fragile trust might have been painstakingly built. The source also highlights another critical oversight directly linked to this lack of local knowledge: the failure to recognize that only wealthy traders or traffickers could afford vehicles in the region.
Interesting detail.
Yeah, it's a seemingly minor economic detail, but if understood, it meant missed opportunities to target the right groups. If the command understood this basic economic reality that vehicles weren't common, civilian transport, their intelligence gathering and targeting could have been far more precise, focusing on a much smaller, more identifiable segment of the population rather than employing these broad, indiscriminate patrols that just antagonize everyone. Such culturally tone-deaf and economically blind actions undoubtedly have a corrosive long-term impact on local populations' willingness to cooperate, or, crucially, to trust any external forces, making any future efforts at stabilization or assistance exponentially harder and more resource-intensive. It's a vicious cycle, really, born of ignorance.
This really drives home the idea, doesn't it? Local granular knowledge isn't just helpful or a secondary consideration, it's absolutely essential for effective and, frankly, ethical operations. Without it, you're not just fighting an elusive enemy, you're also potentially alienating and even harming the very people you're ostensibly trying to help, creating a whole new set of problems and fueling the very insurgency you're trying to suppress. It's a tragic testament to the power of context. Okay, Section 4. Technology's promise and its neglect. That tragic testament to context leads us directly to another profound paradox in modern warfare: the underutilized toolkit. Our source makes it unequivocally clear that despite having access to what can only be described as incredibly advanced, cutting-edge tools, DOT commanders often fail to utilize them to their full potential. We're talking about capabilities that sound almost like science fiction, but they are very much real and available today. Things like high-resolution satellite surveillance that can monitor vast areas with incredible detail, sophisticated phone signal geolocation that can pinpoint individuals or groups, advanced spy planes equipped with a myriad of sensors. These aren't futuristic concepts. They exist, they're operational, and they're at the disposal of modern militaries. Yet they often remain largely untapped for precision operations.
What's truly fascinating and deeply frustrating here is the sheer contradiction. Having such incredible technological capabilities at one's disposal, tools designed precisely for intelligence gathering and precision targeting, but consistently failing to deploy them effectively or comprehensively.
Right.
Recalling that earlier operation where vehicles laden with weapons dispersed after being spotted by a drone, the source pointedly notes that no cellular traffic was monitored in the area, which could have tracked the movement of individuals coordinating those vehicles. A basic step, you'd think.
You would think.
Furthermore, no requests were made for Air Force or Navy support to track the dispersed vehicles, which could have provided persistent aerial or even maritime surveillance. Even the drones that were used, despite their initial success in spotting the threat, were limited by fuel constraints, suggests the lack of planning for sustained surveillance. And crucially, the lack of license plates or identifiable features rendered their footage largely useless for tracking specific vehicles after they scattered. This isn't the lack of tools, it's a profound systemic failure to integrate them into a cohesive, intelligence-driven, truly proactive strategy. This underutilization can stem from various factors. It could be logistical hurdles in deploying and maintaining complex tech in austere environments. Sure. Or a lack of sufficient specialized training for personnel on how to fully leverage these sophisticated systems. That's possible too. But it could also be symptomatic of bureaucratic inertia or a cultural resistance within military structures, where established, more traditional methods are favored over adapting to new technology-enabled paradigms. The end result, regardless of the cause, is always the same. Precision capabilities are squandered. Operations revert to less effective, more dangerous methods, and the cycle of ineffectiveness continues.
It's almost like having a supercar, or in this case, an entire fleet of supercars in the garage, perfectly capable of navigating complex terrain with speed and precision, but consistently choosing to ride a bicycle through heavy, dangerous traffic.
Oh, that's a good analogy. Yeah.
The potential for precise, intelligence-driven operations that minimize risk to both forces and civilians is clearly there, yet it often remains untapped, leading to the same old, costly, ineffective, and tragic approaches we've been discussing. It's a baffling strategic oversight that carries immense human and financial costs. And what might be behind this pervasive neglect of advanced capabilities? Our source points to a deeply ingrained issue, one it terms a spreadsheet mentality versus genuine strategic action. It describes a profound preference for appearances over results, noting pointedly that commanders, often stationed miles away from the conflict zone, prioritize spreadsheets detailing casualties and activities over purposeful action that genuinely impacts the situation. This paints a vivid and frankly disturbing picture of a detached command structure making decisions from a remove.
Yeah, and this raises an absolutely critical question about accountability and efficacy. How does this physical and psychological distance, combined with an almost exclusive reliance on purely quantitative metrics and reports, fundamentally distort the reality of the situation on the ground? When commanders are primarily focused on filling in boxes on a report, tracking numbers of patrols, numbers of engagements, numbers of casualties, maybe even numbers of rounds fired, it inadvertently creates a feedback loop where ineffective actions are perpetuated.
Right, as long as the numbers look okay.
Exactly. As long as these actions generate reportable activity, they can be perceived as successful, or at least acceptable, regardless of their actual tangible impact on security or stability. This metric-driven approach, devoid of qualitative understanding and local context, can be incredibly dangerous. It means that the strategic objectives become secondary to the bureaucratic imperative of demonstrating activity, filling the spreadsheet. This detachment also has profound ethical implications, particularly for the morale, trust, and mental well-being of the soldiers who are on the front lines, facing the direct, often brutal consequences of these decisions, when their lives are being risked and even lost for what amounts to a statistical entry on a spreadsheet. It fundamentally undermines their belief in the mission, their confidence in their leaders, their sense of purpose. It's a recipe for disillusionment and ultimately strategic failure, because the real indicators of success, hearts and minds, local stability, reduced violence, are not being measured or prioritized.
This isn't just about military tactics, then. It's about a much broader discussion on leadership, accountability, and the inherent profound danger of making life and death decisions from a remove without truly understanding the human, cultural, and political reality of the situation on the ground. It highlights a critical flaw in how progress is often measured in complex conflicts. And this is where the implications of these strategic failures become truly profound, leading us to look at the broader impact of these approaches. Let's go there. Section 5. The broader impact, endless cycles, and unaddressed root causes. That focus on profound implications brings us directly to a much larger and indeed more devastating problem: the endless cycles of conflict and the consistently unaddressed root causes that fuel them. Our source uses the tragic example of Haiti as a prime illustration of the futility of these approaches. Despite multiple international military interventions, countless missions, and, as our source highlights, endless combat patrols conducted by various forces over decades, the country has demonstrably failed to stabilize. It's heartbreaking. The grim cycle continues unabated. Insurgents are killed only for new ones to emerge because the root causes remain unaddressed.
Oh.
It's not just a treadmill of violence, it's a deeply entrenched, self-perpetuating system that these traditional tactics seem completely incapable of breaking.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the source also provides the example of Afghanistan, offering another poignant and incredibly costly illustration of this systemic failure.
Yeah, another tragic example.
In Afghanistan, foreign forces, despite immense investment and sacrifice, often built infrastructure that locals neither needed nor could maintain. This highlights a fundamental, deeply damaging disconnect between external efforts and local realities, similar to the cultural ignorance we discussed earlier. It's the same pattern. This underscores a critical point that both examples powerfully reinforce. Military solutions, particularly those focused predominantly on reactive combat patrols and kinetic operations, are almost invariably symptoms treating rather than disease curing.
Good way to put it.
They address the immediate manifestations of conflict, the visible insurgents, the direct acts of violence, but they bypass or completely ignore the underlying deeply entrenched conditions that give rise to those insurgents and that violence in the first place. This approach, by its very nature, ensures that the problem, far from being solved or even diminished, simply regenerates, often stronger and more resilient than before, because the fertile ground for discontent and rebellion remains untouched. The focus on patrols and kinetic action often becomes a distraction from the true work of nation building and addressing systemic issues.
These examples, Haiti and Afghanistan, they show us starkly, unequivocally, that you absolutely cannot bomb or patrol or enforce your way out of complex, deeply rooted societal and political problems. You simply cannot impose lasting stability from the outside if you're not simultaneously and comprehensively addressing what's truly destabilizing the region from within. It's a sobering lesson, one that seems to be repeatedly ignored, unfortunately. So if it's not simply a lack of patrols or military presence that's fueling this instability, what are the true drivers, according to our source? The source precisely identifies the core, fundamental issues that these traditional combat patrols utterly fail to address, and in some cases may even exacerbate. These are poverty, corruption, chaotic urbanization, and lack of infrastructure. These aren't minor issues, they're deep-seated societal problems, the very bedrock upon which grievances and insurgencies are built. Our source delivers a powerful, almost heartbreaking statement on this. Weapons and patrols cannot solve hunger, illiteracy, or systemic corruption, yet these tactics persist. It's a direct challenge to the entire prevailing military-first paradigm.
What's profoundly fascinating here is the crystal clear articulation of the real drivers of insurgency and instability. It fundamentally reframes the entire problem, doesn't it? Shifting it away from a purely military one, a simplistic matter of identifying and neutralizing enemies, to a much broader, deeply complex socioeconomic and political challenge. By focusing almost exclusively on kinetic operations and the presence of patrols, military interventions often ignore these foundational issues. In doing so, they not only fail to address the root causes, but can also inadvertently create a self-perpetuating conflict. The military presence, intended to be a solution, paradoxically becomes part of the problem.
Right, it can fuel resentment.
Exactly. It can be perceived as an occupying force, disrupting daily life, causing accidental civilian casualties, and inadvertently providing a powerful rallying cry for insurgents. These insurgent groups then skillfully capitalize on local grievances that are deeply rooted in these very unaddressed issues. The crushing poverty, the blatant corruption, the lack of basic services like clean water, education, healthcare. When people see that their fundamental needs are not being met and that external forces are not truly improving their lives, resentment festers, and the cycle of violence finds new fuel. Ignoring these fundamental drivers means that military efforts are, at best, a temporary suppression, never a lasting solution.
This truly is the heart of the matter. This feels like the core takeaway. If we want to genuinely solve conflicts and achieve any semblance of lasting peace, we have to look far beyond the immediate fight, beyond the daily patrol count, beyond the spreadsheets, and confront these underlying conditions that create such fertile ground for insurgency and prolonged instability. It's about treating the deep-seated disease, not just the fleeting, recurring symptoms that inevitably reappear. It demands a completely different approach. Which brings us neatly to Section 6, towards a new paradigm: intelligence, integration, and impact. So after laying out these critical failures and their devastating consequences, what path forward does our source propose? It introduces a compelling vision for what it calls a new paradigm, advocating for a significant, indeed revolutionary shift in focus, from reactive, often indiscriminate patrols to proactive, intelligence-driven strategies. The core message is clear and unambiguous. Military operations must shift focus from reactive patrols to proactive, intelligence-driven strategies. This sounds like far more than just a tactical adjustment, doesn't it? It sounds like a fundamental change in mindset, doctrine, and operational philosophy.
Absolutely. It's a complete re-envisioning of the approach. It has to be. The source doesn't just call for a shift. It offers specific, actionable recommendations for implementing this new paradigm. For instance, it explicitly states that borders must be secured with advanced screening technologies, directly addressing the issue of porous borders and uncontrolled movement of weapons we discussed earlier.
Using the tech that exists.
Exactly. Moving beyond traditional checkpoint failures to a technologically enabled preventative posture. And crucially, it mandates that local knowledge must guide operations. This isn't presented as a mere suggestion. It's framed as an essential requirement, recognizing its profound strategic value. The source further emphasizes prioritizing cultural understanding, leveraging native speakers and community leaders to identify threats early. This proactive approach demands nothing less than a fundamental overhaul in military doctrine, in how personnel are trained, and in how resources are allocated. It signifies a necessary and urgent move away from brute force and generalized, often counterproductive, sweeps towards precision, deep understanding, and proactive prevention. It's about being smarter, more surgical, and ultimately more effective, rather than simply being tougher or more active. It acknowledges that the human and technological dimensions are not separate, but intricately linked for success. They have to work together.
So this isn't just about doing things differently then, it's about rethinking the entire purpose and strategy of intervention. It's about aiming for genuine effectiveness and lasting impact, rather than merely appearing busy or defaulting to familiar but flawed tactics. It suggests a vision where military power is wielded with far greater discernment and intelligence. And this leads us to the vision of a holistic approach for achieving lasting stability. The source continues with proposed solutions that integrate various capabilities, moving far beyond singular military actions. It argues that real-time surveillance, from drones to satellites, must be fully utilized to track and intercept insurgents before they disperse. This directly addresses the severe underutilization of technology we highlighted earlier, advocating for seamless integration of all available assets. But most importantly, and this is where the approach truly becomes holistic and transformative, it states that military interventions must address underlying issues like poverty and infrastructure deficits, which fuel instability. This is a profound shift, acknowledging that military action alone is simply insufficient.
What's profoundly fascinating here is the comprehensive and integrated nature of this call for a multifaceted approach. It's not just about better military tactics. It's about seamlessly integrating military actions with broader development initiatives, robust diplomatic efforts, and long-term economic solutions. This implies a significant move beyond purely kinetic operations, that is, the use of direct force like bombings or targeted strikes, to a sustained integrated engagement that tackles conflict at multiple interconnected levels, security, economic, and social. However, implementing such an integrated approach presents its own unique and formidable set of challenges. Let's be realistic.
Oh, absolutely. Huge challenges.
It requires unprecedented levels of collaboration, not just within different branches of the military, but crucially, between military and civilian agencies, and often across different national and international organizations. That's incredibly difficult. It also demands a long-term commitment of resources, political will, and patience that often far exceeds the typical short-term political cycles of a nation. It's a marathon, not a sprint, and necessitates a genuine, deep understanding of the complex interdependencies at play, moving beyond quick fixes to sustainable solutions that build capacity and resilience within the affected communities themselves. That's the real goal.
This, then, is a vision for genuinely breaking the cycle of violence and tragic loss, for creating lasting stability by tackling the problems at their root cause, rather than just patching over the symptoms again and again. It's a powerful, hopeful, yet incredibly challenging proposition that demands a radical reevaluation of how we approach global conflicts. So what does this all mean for us as individuals trying to understand our complex world? We've just unpacked how traditional combat patrols, despite their perceived proactivity and supposed necessity, often perpetuate cycles of violence and instability. We've explored in detail how systemic flaws in military bureaucracy, a profound ignorance of local culture and its nuances, and the shocking underutilization of available advanced technology all combine to make these missions tragically ineffective, often at immense human cost. The path forward, as our sources so eloquently and urgently suggest, lies in a complete overhaul, embracing intelligence-driven, culturally aware, technologically integrated strategies that proactively address the true, deep-seated root causes of conflict, poverty, corruption, and a severe lack of essential infrastructure. It's about changing the fundamental equation of intervention.
Yeah, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the central overarching message here is profoundly clear and critically important. True security and lasting peace emerge not just from confronting adversaries on a battlefield. That's only part of it, maybe even a small part. It emerges from a profound empathetic understanding of the complex human systems they inhabit. It requires a strategic commitment to investing in comprehensive, multifaceted solutions that build and uplift communities, that foster self-reliance, rather than simply seeking to identify and destroy threats. It's about creating enduring conditions where conflict becomes less likely to emerge in the first place, by addressing the very grievances that fuel it.
And until these profound systemic changes are implemented, our source warns us with chilling clarity that traditional combat patrols will continue to produce tragic, preventable outcomes. Soldiers will, regrettably, remain mere bait in a deadly, often futile game. And the devastating toll of widows and orphans will continue to grow, a heartbreaking testament to strategic myopia. This deep dive then leaves us with a critical, urgent question that extends beyond military strategy and into the realm of societal responsibility. How can we, as societies, as informed citizens, ensure that our leaders and our military strategies truly prioritize meaningful, lasting outcomes over the mere appearance of activity, and courageously embrace solutions that honor both the lives of those serving in uniform and the communities they are meant to protect? It's a question we must all grapple with and demand answers to. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into a truly challenging but vitally important topic. We encourage you to continue exploring these ideas, to question conventional wisdom, and to keep asking these critical questions. We'll be back soon with another deep dive.